A very good evening and a warm welcome to our webinar today from Goldvorsorg under the motto Borderless Through Gold. Today we will be discussing many exciting topics and developments across Europe. What does the current political situation mean for precious metals? And of course the economic situation as well. In addition, we naturally want to talk about emigration and above all, the importance of high security storage facilities in Europe, but also in third countries. So many exciting topics await you here today. But I won't be doing this alone. Today we once again have a knowledgeable panel of experts with us. On the one hand, our expert for precious metals and high security storage, Christian Trinker.
That is absolutely wonderful to hear. And I wish you a very pleasant good evening.
On the other hand, we also have our market analyst and key account manager, Nikola Dragojevic, with us. And we are especially delighted to have with us today our key account manager from Hungary, Melitta.
A very good evening. I'm truly happy to be here.
Yes, indeed, many incredibly exciting topics await us today, dear viewers. Please join in on the conversation and feel absolutely free to ask us any of your questions as we go along. Through the live chat, you have the opportunity to direct your questions to our experts during the webinar. These will then be answered in detail right afterwards. Of course, you are also welcome to join us via our YouTube channel. And of course, there will be exciting information as well. You will also learn about precious metals and gold investment. So lots of information, many exciting things, and plenty of current topics to cover here, of course. But not only that, if you want to learn more about precious metals in general, or about our gold investment products, you are of course welcome to call us at any time at the number +43 133 05 033 and 2 times the 4. You are welcome to contact us at any time and take advantage of a precious metals consultation or simply get advice. And of course, you can also learn more about our gold investment products. Now, I don't want to beat around the bush any longer. Let's get started right away because many exciting topics are waiting for us. Europe is undergoing political and economic upheaval. As we know, politics goes hand in hand with economic policy, and currently planning security is only partially present in various areas. So let me ask you right away, Christian, where are we heading in terms of economic policy, and what options are there to protect one's assets?
Yes, that's the key word. It's certainly exciting today. We'll take a look at what's going on and why so many people want to leave Europe. What's behind all this? So much uncertainty. That reminds me, I recently spoke with an acquaintance and he asked me, Christian, do you think the government will last another year? And I thought about it for a moment, then laughed and said, well, which government do you actually mean? And jokes aside, there's actually some truth to it because we're no longer talking about an exception, but in fact, we're talking about the normal state of affairs in Europe, unfortunately. So I really don't want to be seen as being too polarizing here. But the simple fact of the matter is that Europe isn't exactly in the best economic shape right now, to put it quite mildly. We just have to take a look at a few individual countries. Let's start with France. The country looks back on an especially difficult year in 2025, a year marked by political instability, changes in government, social polarization, left, right, the usual old classics, and a growing dissatisfaction among the population. Since 2024, France has already, just imagine, had its 5th head of government, 5 in 2 years. And just now, only in February, the French parliament finally managed to pass the budget for this year. After several votes of no confidence, and of course, trust in the country has been shaken. And why? Because of the enormous national debt, of course, and the budget deficit. A government without a majority and a country with no financial leeway. Let's continue on to Belgium. There, the situation might be even more drastic. The head of the Belgian central bank, Mr. Wunsch, publicly states, we have no more money. Same problems as in France, massive debt and a budget deficit. The government needs to come up with at least 5 billion euros just to be able to balance the budget for this year. So it's already pretty dramatic. Then let's continue on to Germany. What's going on in Germany? There's been a new government for about a year now, you could say. It's a revival of what we had before. The Grand Coalition is back, but the structural problems that caused the situation in the first place haven't disappeared. On the contrary, German industry is shrinking and energy costs remain high. And so this common thread, if you want to put it that way, runs right across the board. Many countries in Europe, over-indebtedness and deficits. Just like in the song contest, we could now switch from country to country and see who gets the most points for debt and deficit. But unfortunately, this is a bit more serious than the song contest, than our beloved ESC, because it really affects the livelihoods of many people. And then there's another level that people aren't really aware of yet. That's the dependency not just of Germany or Austria, but of all of Europe. From the outside, dependent on energy and dependent on military protection. In July of last year, the EU reached a trade agreement with the USA with a tariff rate of 15%. It was cancelled again in the meantime and then reintroduced, as tends to happen with the USA lately. But the quid pro quo for these 15%, where you have to say it's actually low compared to other countries, yes, but the quid pro quo is that we have to buy a lot of American weapons and energy. So dependencies. That means for Europe, it is making itself even more dependent on global regimes, starting with Russia, now with Trump, and even China. So there's a whole mountain of homework that still needs to be done, which would also, just like that, okay, but that also means a lot for your assets. When a government becomes unstable, the economic policy of that country becomes unstable as well. And when economic policy becomes unstable, the budget becomes unstable as well. And if that also becomes unstable, then people start looking for solutions. And these solutions often mean higher taxes, new levies, and printing even more money, which leads to sharply rising inflation. And this is where you come into play, dear viewers. Because how do I protect my assets in such an environment? That's the question I hear over and over again in many, many conversations. And the honest answer is there isn't one perfect solution. For some, emigrating is the right path, but it's not for everyone. Everyone has to figure that out for themselves a bit and maybe start by exploring it with a short vacation. Bye-bye. It's not for everyone. But there are building blocks that have already proven in the past that they work very well in such situations. And you've probably already guessed it. One of these building blocks is gold. Because no matter which government is currently in power or which currency happens to be under pressure, gold, yes, it can't be inflated. Anyone who bought gold 20 years ago now has a multiple of the euro value from back then. And that speaks for itself, because gold preserves value in the long term.
Yes, and an important keyword here is, of course, purchasing power. Inflation in Europe has already caused major problems over the past year. We just heard about it as well. And for the decline in economic growth, the euro is therefore also losing more and more value. And that is also synonymous with a loss of wealth. So let me ask our market analyst right away. Nicola, how much is the euro really under pressure at the moment?
Yes, and I would like to warmly welcome our viewers again, since the audio didn't work properly earlier. At this point, just sit back. There are exciting topics ahead. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Christian, for the first topic. I would like to stay here in Europe with you, specifically with the euro in this case. And I'll start with a very simple question, because who among you still has money just lying around in a savings account or a checking account simply because it's convenient? And now most people will probably nod and say, yes, that's exactly what I do. And I also know a lot of people, I talk to many every day, who confirm this. And of course, it feels safe. The money is there. The number on the bank statement doesn't change. Well, hopefully it goes up if it does change. But I actually find that somewhat problematic, because since the introduction of the euro in 1999, the currency has lost purchasing power in Germany alone up to 2023, a loss of 37.6%. And for the entire Eurozone, it's even 39.1%. That means Anyone who had about 10,000 euros in their account 25 years ago and just left it there now has 10,000 euros nominally. Of course, that's what it says on the bank statement, but they can only buy just about 6,000 to 7,500 euros worth of goods or services with it now. The money is there, that's inflation, as you all know, and that's exactly why you can afford less. Inflation continues to rise. And I really want to make clear here what we can learn from the past in Europe. And the important thing is this doesn't just affect the European region, it actually affects the whole world. So almost every country is affected by this. And let's take a look at the inflation rate as well. So in the Eurozone, inflation was always somewhere below 2% between 2012 and 2020. But then it suddenly rose sharply. And in the year 2022, at times it climbed into double digits. And everyone here remembers that period. And the groceries that suddenly cost a third more, the energy bill you looked at twice because you thought something must be wrong. But dear viewers, it was correct. At that time, we had double-digit inflation rates. And now that inflation is officially lower again, many people naturally think, well, that's over. But the ECB is already warning that inflation could once again rise sharply to 3.1% in the second quarter of this year. And this is driven mainly by sudden spikes in energy prices. We all noticed that at the gas stations, and that's a result of the crisis, specifically in the Middle East, which we're currently experiencing. And now there's also a second level coming into play, which is especially relevant for wealth government debt. Countries in the EU currently have very high levels of debt. That's actually nothing new. But if you look at the numbers behind the scenes, it's very dramatic because on average, they have such high levels of debt. It amounts to about 91% of their annual economic output. And when interest rates rise, it becomes significantly more expensive for the states to finance or repay these debts. That might sound somewhat abstract, but it has direct consequences on our daily lives. And then when a state has more and more debt and at the same time has to pay higher interest, it faces a massive problem that is not only difficult to solve, but you could almost say, or you really have to ask yourself, whether it can even be solved at all. And of course, there are many theories about this. So in theory, the state could simply save money, meaning spend less or increase taxes. In practice, however, this is very difficult to implement politically. It rarely happens on a large scale because instead of saving, they do exactly the opposite. That is, they print even more money. And if you raise taxes, of course, that won't reflect well on you either. That's why often another path is taken, higher inflation over several years. In this process, prices rise and money loses its value. And that's the classic scenario. For the state, of course, this has an advantage because debts also become smaller in relation. They become easier to pay back. But for us as citizens, this means that when inflation rises, the purchasing power of our money falls, and those particularly affected are those whose wealth is mainly kept as cash in a bank account because there it doesn't automatically grow with inflation, or rather, it loses real value. That means all those promised high interest rates at the bank or the bank advisor who promises all those high returns, I would think twice about whether those are really high interest rates or at the end of the day, just a story. But the question is, how do you protect your assets in such an environment? And you surely know what I'm getting at. Christian has already mentioned it somewhere today. Gold works quite differently fundamentally and is of course also interesting because it is the only asset class or the only class of wealth that does not require a counterparty. For example, a stock is a promise made by a company. A bond is a promise made by a government. A euro in your bank account is a promise from a bank that they will actually pay it out. And gold is none of those things. And since the introduction of the euro, since 2002, the currency has lost more than 3/4 of its value against gold. And if you look at it the other way around, anyone who bought gold in 2002, instead of leaving euros in their bank account, has multiplied their wealth measured in euros. Not only because gold has risen so sharply, but also because the euro has declined so much. It has continuously declined. And this trend will continue. It's always very important to keep this in mind because simply paying back the debts won't be that easy.
Yes, as we also know, the European Union likes to regulate many things, especially in the financial sector. We've seen this time and again in recent years. Now, there is also supposed to be an additional regulation for asset transparency. Nicola, what exactly does this mean for us?
Yes, so we'll stay in Europe for now because, as you already correctly mentioned, when it comes to asset transparency, there are plans for a fundamental overhaul or restructuring. And you can see this clearly here on the slide. ECB President Christine Lagarde herself has said that the introduction of the digital euro is more important and urgent than ever. And I'd now like to briefly talk about what this actually means and which regulations are already in effect today. Because Europe is currently rebuilding its financial system more or less in the background, and most of the time we don't notice it, or maybe just a few building blocks, and usually we only see the whole picture once it actually comes into force. And I'd like to begin our discussion immediately by looking at cryptocurrencies. This isn't necessarily intended to be a critical or negative observation about cryptocurrencies at this particular stage. I'm simply focusing specifically on the current regulatory landscape here, because since January 1st, 2026, there will be an automatic reporting requirement for all crypto transactions. This means that anyone who buys, sells, or exchanges Bitcoin will, from now on, leave a trail that goes directly to the tax office. That means name, address, amount, wallet address, everything. And this data will be automatically exchanged between all EU countries. And for anyone who thought that crypto would be different or would fly under the government's radar, there was a time when that was true, but unfortunately those days are over. And then we move on to the cash limit. There is also a very important new rule. Starting in mid-2027, a new regulation will gradually come into effect regarding the identification of larger cash payments. Specifically, this means that starting from around 3,000 euros, in many cases, you are no longer anonymous. This means that merchants, especially in sensitive sectors like jewelry, investments, and cars, will then be required to verify and document the buyer's identity. And for you as a citizen, this means that even if you pay with cash, it is no longer automatically anonymous. And the higher the amount, the more likely it is that you will have to show identification. Then this will come into effect in mid-2027, at least partially. And the threshold for this is generally becoming lower and lower. This is also something to keep in mind because the authorities are clearly focused on more transparency and, of course, more control in this area. And the third component, the new anti-money laundering authority, AMLA, has been operating in Frankfurt since July 2025, and it checks whether the member states are complying with the new regulations. That means we basically have authorities that create and issue new guidelines. And then we also set up or establish another authority to constantly check whether these guidelines are actually being followed. There you have it. At the end of the day, it's very efficient, you have to say. And in the future, violations here can result not only in fines, but also in criminal investigations. At this point, and again, the crucial question, what does this actually mean for me personally if I want to protect my assets? First of all, it means that transparency within the European system will, of course, increase massively. And anyone who holds assets in Europe in digital or traditional financial products is becoming increasingly transparent to the authorities. It must also be said that traditional financial products are already very transparent at present, you have to admit. At this point, when it comes to when buying gold, things are still quite simple, you have to say, and that's what we recommend in this context as well. And the whole thing, I always say, this control or these additional regulations are not automatically negative or mandatory negative. On the one hand, but on the other hand, it can also be a good thing. But you should be aware that this is going to happen in the near future and that transparency will continue to increase everywhere. And that is exactly the reason why we thoroughly explain these kinds of complex topics during the webinar, so that you will already have all of this essential information well in advance, long before everything actually comes into full effect. And that's also, in a way, the reason why most people are now interested in investments, or rather investing in precious metals, because they see how things are developing. And on the other hand, investing in precious metals itself is, on the one hand, very easy. That means you just have to come by and have a short conversation. And sometimes you don't even need to have a conversation. You can also order everything through our web shop and simply pick it up. So from that perspective, it's still very easy, which is why we recommend it. And on the other hand, there's also the option of duty-free storage. That means no matter what changes here in the European zone, we still offer solutions abroad as well. And my colleague, Kristen, will explain that later. She will explain how the whole thing works. And we consciously choose to offer this to our customers so that they will find themselves with a much wider variety of options. Should they decide that they would like to store their goods abroad, particularly when considering locations such as Singapore and Dubai, or also, for example, in Switzerland, all of which can be securely held within a specialized duty-free warehouse. Of course, European laws no longer apply in that case. Instead, everything is outsourced at that point.
Yes, as we just heard, the issue of transparency and wealth, especially in the European Union and Europe, continues to increase. This naturally leads many people to consider, or at least think about, emigrating to third countries. And as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, today we also want to talk about the topic of emigration. But there are many different issues that people face when they actually want to get information about this, or even decide to actually emigrate, especially in the form of various hurdles such as taxes. Here, the exit tax is particularly in focus and plays a central role. Christian, what specific taxes can people face here? For those who decide to emigrate, what exactly should they pay attention to?
Yes, it's really interesting. One could start, before I even get into these taxes, by philosophizing a bit. Why do people actually want to emigrate? Is it because you want to go somewhere else? Is that an incentive? Do you want to get there? A nice motivation? Or do you want to get away from somewhere? That's actually not. It's actually a shame, because when I listen to this now, a new bureaucracy is being created, as we just heard. And then a
new authority is created to oversee that authority. And that's already very intense. And if you look at it a bit from a bird's eye view, well, then you'd have to say, you, dear viewers, you are the goose that lays the golden eggs to keep all of this running smoothly. So it's no wonder that if you look at statistics like these, let's forget the exact numbers for a moment and just look at the trend. I think this refers to Germany now, but the trend toward emigration is steadily increasing. You can already see where the trend is heading. Toward emigration, you'd almost have to rephrase it entirely. People want to leave, to move away, but it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's all the same in the end. What's important, and this is often forgotten, is something else entirely. And I've recently looked into this topic more deeply and was really surprised by everything that's out there. A crucial factor when emigrating is to properly deal with the various tax implications. You might think, well, when you move somewhere else, you already have enough tasks just to get settled there. No, there are still quite a few things you need to take care of and wrap up here as well. Some of these things are ones that many people have never even heard of. One of these is the so-called exit tax. This is actually pretty new to me as well. So it's a tax that is incurred when you leave the country. So like back in the days of the knights, when you moved from one knightly kingdom to another, there were the robber barons who would take something from you before you were even allowed to leave. That's kind of what this feels like to me. But whatever. Let's take a look at Germany. That's where the exit tax comes into play. So you might be subject to the exit tax if you own something. So of course, when unlimited tax liability in Germany ends due to moving away, that is by giving up your residence. And if you own something, of course, so that means anyone who leaves Germany may, under certain circumstances, and now it gets interesting, be taxed as if he or she had sold their assets at the time of departure. Even if not a single euro actually changes hands. And there is a legal term for this. It's called the so-called deemed disposal. Well, bureaucracy is always creative. So you haven't sold anything, but the state treats it for tax purposes as if you had. In Austria, of course, the regulation is even a bit broader. When moving away from Austria, any capital gains, that is the increase in value of capital assets, such as a securities portfolio, are subject to Austrian exit taxation, even if you have not actually realized these gains. This means that, for example, anyone who has a stock portfolio that has grown over the years and then leaves the country, you have to pay tax on the entire accumulated gain, even though you haven't sold anything. The good news, however, is that there are differences depending on where you move to. Within the EU, it's naturally easier, but with third countries, it gets quite tough, pretty hefty. So what does this mean now? Practically, for anyone considering moving away, of course, we don't want to discourage you from doing so, on the contrary. But what's important is that you inform yourself about all aspects and do so in good time. So definitely plan this topic as early as possible with an expert, such as a tax advisor, so that you can avoid unpleasant surprises when the time actually comes for you to move away. So there are definitely legal ways to structure things, but you have to look into them in good time. And as I said, definitely discuss everything with a good tax advisor and expert. This goes far beyond the scope of this webinar. Our intention is simply to make you aware that these things even exist. Or you simply move within the EU. Then it's easier. For example, when moving from Austria to another EU country, there are many exceptions to the rules. Or of course, there is another option, namely gold as an investment, physical gold. For example, in an international duty-free warehouse. This is then largely decoupled from these regulations. It is generally not subject to any annual tax liability. And again, my advice, anyone who wants to emigrate should definitely allow themselves enough time beforehand and plan everything in advance. Just a thought.
Yes, now we've heard about the general conditions, what exactly you should pay attention to, at least in theory. Now, of course, we also want to get more into the practical side of things. Now, we also want to hear a perspective that has become particularly interesting in recent weeks, namely directly from Hungary. There we are currently observing a very unique dynamic around precious metals and the demand for them. I am very pleased that she is here today, especially for us, our key account manager, Melissa Zerkish.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Zerkish, as you just said, key account manager at Goldversorger in the Budapest branch for 3 years now. Part of this company. During this time, I have spoken with several thousand customers, many of them internationally. I speak German so well because I lived in Germany for several years before returning to Hungary. That time really shaped me, and today this experience helps me every day in my work. Since I look after so many German-speaking customers, when we look at the current situation in Hungary, we see several developments that strongly influence our daily lives, have a significant impact. For example, the Hungarian forint has been remarkably strong against the euro for months. There are several reasons for this, including a relatively tight monetary policy compared to the region in recent years. While many European countries kept their interest rates very low for a long time, the Hungarian central bank was quick to raise rates in order to curb inflation. There are some peculiarities in Hungary. The country has two currencies, the euro and there is no intention to abolish the Hungarian forint. Historically, the forint has also played a special role. This has its roots in the financial crisis of 2008, when the country ran into significant difficulties. Since then, Hungary has pursued a policy of monetary independence in order not to have to hand over monetary policy decisions to Brussels. This attitude still explains today why the forint exists and why it is politically desired. Now we come to the most important point, namely, demand for precious metals in Hungary. In Hungary, precious metals have held a special significance for centuries. Due to the turbulent history of the country, gold and silver have always been regarded as reliable safeguards. and savings often as the only thing that survived political and economic upheavals unscathed, just as everywhere in practice. This deeply rooted tradition shapes many people's relationship to physical assets, even to this day. This trend became especially pronounced in 2022 when a war broke out in the immediate vicinity. People here felt this physical proximity very acutely. This led to an explosive surge in demand for gold in the first weeks. We had queues outside the branch and had to start keeping waiting lists because we could no longer handle the rush. Many people were simply seeking security and physical gold. It is deeply rooted here in people's consciousness as an instrument of protection. At Goldvossorg, in addition to our branch in Budapest, we also have a high security vault. This vault is used not only by our Hungarian customers, but also by clients worldwide, because Hungary is often seen as a kind of Gallic village within Europe. A location that often takes a special path on many issues and is therefore considered stability-oriented. The customers who come to us today are from Hungary and the neighboring regions. A particularly large number come from the Balaton region, where a large community, a German community, has developed over the past few years. But we also have many visitors from Eastern Hungary, as well as from neighboring countries such as Romania and Serbia, since the proximity to Budapest is ideal for them. This German community is especially noteworthy. It deserves special mention. In recent years, many Germans, and to some extent Austrians as well, have bought homes at Lake Balaton. The reason is simple. The cost of living in Hungary is significantly lower. To give a few concrete examples, the weekly grocery shop that might cost 120 or 150 euros in Germany, here it often ranges between 60 and 80 euros. A meal at a restaurant for two people costs, in many regions, 30 or 40 euros, whereas in Germany you can hardly get away with less than 60 or 70 euros. These real differences mean that many people here can afford a standard of living that they would no longer have in this form in Germany or Austria. A topic that is currently extremely present is the political development, because the results of the Hungarian parliamentary elections have been making headlines all over Europe in recent weeks. Many of the people we support here, especially immigrants from Germany and Austria, are watching this development very closely. To understand why this situation is so emotionally charged, it must be mentioned that things did not go well during Viktor Orban's last term in office. Several sectors have been lagging behind for years, for example, healthcare or the education system. A lot has already been done in the healthcare system, especially outside the capital. Some hospitals have indeed been modernized and equipped with new devices, but there is still a lot to be done here. There is also still a lot to be done in the education system. Orban has made school books freely available to every student and abolished tuition fees, but there is still much work to be done. In a European comparison, Hungary is at least 10 years behind in this area. Moreover, it is known, putting it cautiously, that many people from Orban's circle have benefited economically in particular. It was almost proverbial. Anyone driving a Bentley in Hungary is part of the system. On the other hand, however, Orban has invested heavily in families and pensioners. Families with several children pay extremely low taxes, one of the lowest tax burdens in all of Europe. As a result, Hungary became a very attractive country for young families and people who value low deductions. His political successor, Peter Magyar, was himself formerly part of the Fidesz party, but now aims to improve precisely those areas that were neglected under Orban. The EU sees Magyar as a rather Eurosceptical yet friendly politician, which raises high expectations. At the same time, he has already announced that there will be no changes on key issues. For example, he has already stated that he will continue to import Russian gas, as it is economically the most sensible option for Hungary. Likewise, there will be no major changes in migration policy. So whether Magyar will actually move closer to the EU or whether much will remain the same is yet to be seen. In many conversations with our clients, we sense a mixture of hope and concern. One particularly striking example was a former Berlin police officer who moved to Hungary because of his 8-year-old son. He told me that in Berlin, he felt every day that he could no longer protect his child. The situation on the streets, the political atmosphere, the lack of security, it all became too much for him. He simply wanted his son to grow up carefree. He once told me, "I wanted to raise him somewhere children are still allowed to be children." I hear stories like this often. People who haven't returned to their old homeland for years because they no longer feel safe there. I also have a client from Austria who, as he put it, was very well known there during the mass migration of 2015. He lived near the Hungarian-Austrian border and always reported on YouTube, until Austria's authorities took notice of him and called him a conspiracy theorist. He was supposedly very popular with his posts, but then he got scared, sold everything, his house and so on, and emigrated to Hungary. Since then, he has never been back to Austria. A customer had an antique shop in Dresden. He also sold everything, bought a lot of gold, and emigrated to Hungary as well. And as he said, it was for geopolitical reasons. He said that most of his newly made friends whom he met here in Hungary and who have children had the explicit wish to raise their children without LGBTQ propaganda in schools. A very big topic within the community. It's somewhat less relevant, but still worth mentioning. Recently, precious metals in Hungary may only be sold by dealers who possess an official state license. Many providers are unable to meet this requirement and have therefore dropped out. However, we received this license immediately, so we can continue to trade without any restrictions. The Hungarian National Bank also plays a major role in the precious metals market. Just for your information, in September 2024, its gold reserves amounted to 94.5 million euros. It increased its holdings from 1,000 tons to 110,000 tons. This is one of the largest increases in Europe by comparison. If you take all these developments together, political changes, the economic situation, strong demand for gold, a growing expatriate community, and a deep need for security, you can see just how dynamically Hungary is changing right now. Many people are thinking internationally, comparing locations, questioning systems, and looking for reliable long-term solutions. For many of them, Hungary has become a real stable alternative. And I am convinced that this trend will continue to intensify in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Melitta, thank you very much for your insights. Yes, just a few weeks ago, a new government was elected in Hungary. And in most cases, that also means changes in economic policy. But what political changes can mean and what effects they can have on precious metals and wealth, our market analyst, Nicola, will now tell us.
Yes, thank you, Melitta, for your insights from your perspective. I myself have also been there several times, including now at our branch. It really has to be said, the Hungarian population is very fond of gold. That's also one of the reasons why we have expanded our branch and built even more customer spaces, because it was getting a bit cramped there, and that shows just how much the Hungarian population relies on gold as a safeguard. And speaking of elections, after 16 years in power, Viktor Orban has now admitted his defeat, and Peter Magyar and his party have won with a 2/3 majority. That's just as a side note, but I don't want to talk about politics. I want to talk about a question that is relevant to us here. What does this election mean for wealth, for Austrian, German, and European assets? For a long time, Hungary was the prime example that you could play by completely different rules within the EU than the rest. taxes, little regulatory pressure, a political system that didn't let Brussels tell it what to do. For many people who were considering relocating within the EU, Hungary was therefore a real option. And that's why we also serve a lot of clients in Hungary, clients who previously bought from us in Austria or also in Germany. And here I'd like to start with the tax argument, because for many, that's actually the core issue. Just imagine you earn 50,000 euros a year. In Austria, depending on your income bracket, you pay up to 42% income tax on that. In Germany, it's roughly the same. In Hungary, it's a flat 15%, no matter whether you earn 20,000 or 2 million. That means the rate stays the same. And that's called, as I've also researched, a flat tax. And the corporate tax for companies, in Hungary, it's actually just 9%. That's the lowest rate in the entire EU. And will that change under Makiart? That's the question now. No, that's very important because he has announced that he will stick to the flat tax. Orban has even elevated it to constitutional status. A change would even require a 2/3 majority, and therefore, is this just a marginal issue now? Magyar does have exactly this majority, but he has made it clear that he will not use it for this purpose. But what has Magyar actually announced now? He has promised to first take action against corruption, as demanded by the EU, specifically to get the frozen funds for Hungary released and to strengthen Hungary's position in the EU and NATO again, which hasn't been the case in the past. And of course, that sounds like stability, rapprochement, and normality. And in the short term, that may be true to some extent. However, Magyar is planning a wealth tax for wealthy individuals, though the exact details are still unclear. So if you are considering moving to Hungary, you should definitely keep an eye on this, of course. And the second point is even more interesting, and it concerns gold directly under Orban. The Hungarian National Bank, as Melitta already mentioned earlier, has massively increased its gold reserves. That means from 3 tons to over 110 tons. And that was a conscious strategic decision. That means moving away from the dollar, away from other currencies, away from dependence on the Western financial system, and towards an asset without a counterparty. And now I ask myself at this point, maybe he already knew, Orban, which direction things would go in the next election. And with this massive increase, he may have already prepared Hungary in some way. And the question I also ask myself here is, will this policy be continued in some way with the increase of gold reserves? Or will Hungary, under his leadership, become more strongly reintegrated into the EU financial system and start buying more European or EU-backed financial products again? We don't know that yet. We'll have to wait and see. But personally, I believe that Hungary will continue this gold policy or this aggressive gold strategy, and that the central bank reserves will continue to be increased as well. I definitely see it in the behavior of our customers in Hungary. They trust gold, they believe in gold. Accordingly, our branch is full and busy every day, especially after this change in government. You could also say that no new prime minister can somehow inflate gold. What you have, you will definitely keep. And that's exactly the core message I want to share or take away here. This election shows how quickly political conditions can change. Assets that are tied to political constellations are never independent and, of course, depend on politicians. This case does not apply to gold, however. That means gold is independent of all that. Gold remains independent no matter what political decisions are made. Here too, you can see, or it remains to be seen, how Europe, Hungary, and the Magyars will continue to change or where things will go from here.
Thank you, Nicola, for your assessment. Yes, as we just heard, our neighboring country is considered a pioneer when it comes to gold. Especially interesting, Hungary currently ranks number 1 in terms of gold reserves per capita in Central and Eastern Europe. So, Christian, why is that the case, and why is Hungary putting such a strong emphasis on gold?
Yes, we've already heard some figures. And it really is a fascinating story that the Hungarians have brought to the world. one certainly really has to say at this point. The graphic now shows only what has been purchased over the course of a year. But in fact, if you look at it over a decade or several years, you come to some very interesting conclusions. And I myself was amazed when I learned about the whole thing. You never stop learning. So Hungary really bought big, you have to say. Why? Why is it that a country of this size, well, we Austrians aren't any bigger, it's roughly comparable, I'd say. Why did a small country, buy so much gold in such a short time? Why did a small country, buy so much gold in such a short time? And what can we as private investors learn from this? So if we start with the numbers, they really speak for themselves. If we go back a bit into the past, some people might still remember that time. I certainly do. So after the end of communism in 1989, I believe, the then leadership of the Hungarian Central Bank decided to reduce the gold reserves from 46 tons all the way down to just 3 tons. That was kind of the trend back then. And those 3 tons stayed pretty much the same until 2018. So for almost 30 years, 3 tons, that was the official stance. Gold is old-fashioned after all. Government bonds are more modern, more liquid, and offer better returns. And that wasn't just the case in Hungary. We Austrians also pretty much sold off our gold reserves a bit earlier, I think around 2006 or so, just so we could post a balanced budget for once, so no deficit for once, and then it was, gone. So a pity about the Austrian gold. In Hungary too, no one cared about it for decades. But then in 2018, there was a complete change of course. So in October 2018, the Hungarian Central Bank bought over 28 tons of pure gold. I don't know where the money came from, but with that, they increased their gold reserves from 3 to almost 32 tons. That's already enormous. 2018, mind you. And that was just the beginning. In 2021, Hungary struck again, and you could say tripled its reserves to almost 95 tons. And the Hungarian National Bank explicitly justified this by citing rising inflation risks, growing national debt, and the desire for a safe haven. So really, you have to say very wise. And in 2024 came the next step, when they increased it again to over 110 tons in total. So Hungary, little Hungary, now has the highest gold reserves per capita in Central and Eastern Europe, by far. So from 3 to 110 tons in less than 6 years. So you can certainly philosophize a bit about why that is. What made a central bank act so consistently and shift its assets so quickly? So the reasoning, officially, the official explanation is the increasing uncertainty in the global economy. Yes, but then many other countries would also have to act. Gold is a safe asset. Yes, that's true. And gold strengthens confidence in the country's financial stability. Those are actually all good arguments. And the Hungarian Central Bank explicitly pointed out that gold carries no credit or counterparty risk. For example, there is no one who can impose sanctions on it or freeze it if it's floating around in some international banks, because the gold is in Hungary in their own vaults. And there's something to be learned from that. Private investors can also learn something from Hungary, what a central bank does for its country. Sometimes it does good things, then maybe an individual does the same thing on a smaller scale. It makes just as much sense. After all, private wealth also faces counterparty risks. Your bank, it can go bankrupt. The state can restrict accounts. Currencies can come under pressure. But gold is the fire extinguisher. It completely eliminates these risks. These risks don't exist with gold. It's the only asset. With gold, there is fundamentally no counterparty, meaning no counterparty risk. And what impressed me most as I learned about and experienced all of this is the consistency. They analyzed it, made a decision, and then implemented it. Over the years, regardless of price fluctuations, regardless of what others thought or did. And I have to say that's an impressive attitude. And I see that in many of my clients as well, who also structure things for the long term and build up security for themselves over time. one that cannot be endangered by counterparties. They choose a large portion of the golden iron portfolio. They set it and hold on to it. And if Hungary can do this at the state level, I believe that as a private individual, you can also follow this logic and do the same. So security is always good. That really deserves praise.
Yes, many fascinating impressions and also arguments from you. Thank you very much, Christian. Now, we've already heard many points, tax matters across Europe, and of course also on the topic of emigrating. Now there will be a short break. You can let it all sink in, and in 60 seconds we'll be back for
you. It is a tribute to the fascinating underwater world of the Pacific. With its distinctive shell design, it stands as a symbol of longevity and endurance. This 1-ounce silver coin features the iconic image of a loggerhead turtle on its obverse side. On the reverse side is the classic portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on display. Minted from 999 fine silver, the coin impresses with its high contrast finish. The Ataki, as it is called in its homeland, is one of the most sought-after bullion coins in the Pacific region and, due to its limited annual mintage, is highly valued by both investors and collectors worldwide.
Yes, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We will stay on the topic of Europe because even though we live in a European Union, we still see major differences between individual countries, especially when it comes to taxes. And it is precisely these differences that could be decisive when it comes to wealth and investment decisions. Nicola, what does the situation look like in detail?
Yes, Christian already spoke earlier about the exit tax and how it applies when moving within the EU, because the EU is a single economic area, but that's not the case when it comes to taxes. They're not always so uniform. Each member country or member state has its own rules. And let's take a look at this concretely with some numbers. The top income tax rate in France is 55.4%, and in Denmark it's even 60.5%. In Austria it's 55%, and in Germany it's over 45%. Whereas in Hungary and the Czech Republic, it's all below 15%. And that's no small difference, you have to say, because the picture is similar when it comes to capital gains. And in Austria, the capital gains tax on dividends and securities profits is 27.5%. In Germany, it's around 26%. And if you are a resident of Hungary, you pay a flat 15% on capital gains. Taxpayer, the same rate as on earned income. And in this graphic, you can see the different tax rates in the EU. And I personally find it very interesting to see how much this all differs here. And for a long time, Portugal was particularly interesting. With its so-called NHR status, the non-habitual resident program, Portugal allowed foreigners to benefit from significantly reduced taxes for 10 years, or even to receive foreign income completely tax-free. This means that capital gains from abroad were also not subject to taxation. And there is no wealth tax. And that has attracted an entire generation of retirees, investors, and freelancers to Portugal. The number of people in Portugal, the number of resident foreign citizens at that time reached a record high of around 480,000 to 500,000 people. But, and this is important for everyone who is now considering Portugal as an option, the old NHR Start program regime is unfortunately a thing of the past. The new program, the so-called IFAITI, excludes pension income and passive investments such as DI, such as dividends or rental income. And these are now taxed at the normal progressive rates of up to 53%. Portugal is no longer what it used to be. And this example makes it very clear how much everything has changed. In the meantime, I have now read or also heard that Turkey again wants to attract some new immigrants with tax-free income or something like that, or other incentives. So you can also see that there are always new countries launching such programs. How long that will last is the question, of course. You saw it happen in Portugal. At some point, it comes to an end there as well. And what does that mean in concrete terms? First, tax residency is one of the most important levers when it comes to building and preserving wealth, yes. And second, these rules change. Yes, that means Portugal has tightened its NHR system. Germany regularly discusses new wealth taxes. Also nothing new. Under the new government, Hungary could, of course, reconsider its flat tax approach, even if that's not currently at the top of the agenda. That means anyone who ties their wealth to a specific tax regime always carries a certain political risk. So what do I recommend, or what do we recommend? My colleague, so Christian, already summed it up quite well earlier. Hold physical gold, of course, then you are outside of these systems. With a holding period of 1 year, the whole thing is tax-free, and you can still buy gold tax-free as well. That's also not normal anymore, I would say. It's also very rare, and especially with the recent developments in gold prices that we've seen lately, the tax exemption is, let's say, a very big advantage. And on the other hand, silver. Silver in bonded warehouses is also tax-free outside of this whole system. Yes, especially outside of Europe, for example, in Singapore, Dubai, or also in Zurich, Switzerland. If you're interested in that, of course, just contact Christian right away. He's our expert here when it comes to all of this.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's come back to the topic of emigrating. Yes, when it comes to emigrating, many people first think about taxes, residency, or visas, but one crucial question is often underestimated. How secure and above all, how mobile is my wealth really? Of course, there are always different approaches, but unfortunately, this topic often doesn't get enough attention or is underestimated. But what absolutely needs to be considered here, Christian, what do you think should be the main focus here?
Yes, exactly. That's right. The important things that you have to take care of course, those are important, like residency and so on. All of that is super important, but most of the time people forget, or maybe not forget, but they should really inform themselves more in advance about how to actually manage their own assets, you know, like how those assets essentially move with you, or how you can manage, use, and live off them from somewhere else. This is often only considered at the very end, and that often leads to problems that could definitely be avoided if you think it through carefully and plan how to approach it right from the start. Because a really important question is, how flexible are your assets? Yes. How mobile are your assets? Are they mobile? Because many people believe that their money will simply move with them. The account remains the account. A securities account remains a securities account. Of course, in theory, that's true. But in practice, it often turns out to be much more complicated, because the accounts often don't work the same way from abroad or from another country as you're used to. These days, it's all very, very, how should I put it, regulated. You can't just transfer securities accounts that easily either, and everything takes longer than you think. And especially during the phase when you haven't yet established a stable structure in the new country, when you're still in the process of building everything up, it can quickly become quite exhausting. So if you break it down and analyze it a bit, basically you could say there are 3 types of assets. Have I already mentioned one? Not mobile, so part of it is tied up. Immobile, yes, real estate or certain insurance policies, they stay where they are. You really don't have any leeway there. As I said, immobile. Now I've said it 3 times, but insurance policies are also one of those things. That reminds me, I have a lot of clients who ultimately canceled their life insurance policies and invested the money in gold and silver. So because life insurance, well, at least not term life, but yeah, life insurance, let's say, is not really a good deal. If you have one, take a look at lvzugold.com. You'll find a lot of information there. You'll be amazed.
But then, so the first thing, real estate. The second is assets that you can theoretically transfer. Bank balances, as I said, securities accounts can be taken with you, but only if the infrastructure is set up accordingly. And there are always difficulties with that. And the third category, of course, is what's left over. Obviously, the assets that are truly independent. So assets that are not tied to banks, legal systems, or individual institutions. And that's where physical gold and also silver come into play again. With physical gold, the question often arises, or I should say the first question is, yeah, how do I take it with me? Yes, the transport. How do you get gold from point A to point B? Of course, it depends on whether you're moving internationally or, for example, within the EU. But I also see very often, especially with my clients, that they choose a completely different approach. The gold remains in a high security vault, an international high security vault, and they can continue to manage it from there. They have the same access as before, without having to worry about transport or bureaucracy. And especially when moving, that's the most relaxed solution. And if you sum it all up, you can boil it down to one point. Wealth, yes, that's global today, but the infrastructure for wealth isn't necessarily so. So the banks, the depositories, the insurance companies, they are still very much tied to regional or national systems. My dear emigrants, they're all probably thinking, yes, that's exactly how it is, because that's their own experience too, which I'm just echoing here. And they've already had to deal a lot with these national systems. And that can often lead to some pretty complicated situations when you move, especially to faraway countries. That's why anyone who is thinking about emigrating, which is also the motto and topic of our evening, should thoroughly deal with this subject, namely how to transfer assets from one country to another. It's very important to do this as early as possible and also with the help of experts.
Yes, as we just heard, when emigrating, it's not just the value of your assets that matters, but above all, their mobility. And this is exactly where a clear difference becomes apparent. While real estate is often tied down and difficult to transfer, gold remains flexible, portable, and can be used internationally. So, Christian, why does gold have such a decisive advantage over real estate in this regard?
Yes, to be fair, I have to say, it's not that one is good and the other is bad. You really can't judge it one-to-one like that. It really depends on many, many factors, because I would say these are two giants battling each other. It's gold versus concrete gold, as people used to say. Because you have to, anyone who has it knows this too. There's nothing better than having your own roof over your head, ideally owning it, and even better, having it paid off. That's the best thing there is. And it doesn't matter whether you have that at home in the country where you used to live or in the new country, the country you've emigrated to. And I really have a lot of clients who first separated themselves from something, but in the end, wherever they settled down, they created their own little paradise again, bought a small house or even a bigger one. And that worked out very well and easily, I would say, thanks to gold. So actually, we can say that the whole thing is complementary. It's also intertwined, gold and real estate, yes. One helps the other and vice versa. So first, many people sold their property in Germany for a good price and then secured it with precious metals. And I won't reveal any names and so on, but I have examples, practical examples from Hungary. Today, we've already heard a lot about Hungary. There are a great many Germans living there. The largest group of immigrants or foreigners in quotation marks in Hungary are Germans. But not only in Hungary, I also have examples from Chile, from West Africa, in Gambia. Many have also moved to Dubai, and that's still not completely out of the picture. And also to Panama, a lot of people in the highlands and on the coast, or even Costa Rica. And once you've managed to emigrate and have truly settled in, then you're happy to be building a new home there once again. I know a lot of people feel addressed by this now. And you send me, or you all send me, pictures of where you've settled, of your new homes. And I get wanderlust when I look at these amazing, vacation photos, you could almost call them, except it's not a vacation anymore. It's the new life that people have built for themselves. And but of course, you first have to take a good look at everything beforehand. Fighting your way through it might be a bit of an exaggeration, but really, you have to do your homework. You have to get informed. And you should really look at everything with experts, what your property is actually worth now, and then carefully consider making a well-founded decision, yes. Because a lot of people ask me what they should do. They still have a property here, whether to sell or not to sell. Only an expert can decide that, and it really depends a lot on the individual situation. Yes, everyone has a different situation, so you really can't make a blanket statement about it. But in any case, in my opinion, real estate is a great thing. But of course, if you're emigrating, there are naturally some limits. We all know how much real estate prices have risen here with us in recent years. that has created high values. But as I said, you can check that thoroughly with an expert, and then you have to consider what is most important to you, because the next thing that's also relevant when emigrating is liquidity. You'll need money there as well to build something new, to create something new. You want to be liquid, to put it simply, but a property ties up your capital. You can't just sell it off in small pieces. You really have to make a big decision there. Yes. So with the property here, you don't necessarily have a lot of liquidity there. Yes. So it's an important topic. You also have to take a look at the tax situation. If you keep a property, you will continue to be liable for taxes here. Again, the expert can help you with that, the tax advisor. That goes beyond the scope of a small webinar, but it's an important thought-provoking point for you because many people have a treasure in their property. And of course, when emigrating, you can use that to build something new elsewhere as well. Yes. Gold, if you compare property to gold again, gold is of course super flexible because, as we've already heard today, it's independent of third parties. It's not tied down, not even to any kind of bureaucracy. That makes you very flexible. So it's definitely worth taking a closer look at this. Do the calculations with an expert, and if you decide to sell, it's best to invest in gold or silver, or you can keep it. That's also a good decision. It depends on your situation. I wish you all the best.
Yes, and now we'll see how satisfied our customers are in a short interview.
First of all, a very good day to you. We're here in Costa Rica enjoying beautiful weather, and of course, that has a positive effect on our mood. Absolutely. We actually emigrated twice. The first time we emigrated was in 2000. So in 2000, we emigrated to Hungary, and we then made the decision, which was very, very difficult for us, because we had a beautiful house there with a panoramic view down to Lake Balaton, and it was extremely hard for us to sell it, especially for my wife. She said, for me, it was truly heartbreaking. And back then, the question arose, where do we go? Where will we feel comfortable later on? And then we remembered that 30 years earlier, we had already visited Costa Rica, traveled throughout the whole country, and that we had really, really liked it there. Back in those days, we also decided to exchange a portion of our money into physical gold, primarily for security reasons, of course, and also because we felt that it would be much more convenient and easy to transport if we had to move quickly. And that's when GVS, the Goldvoorsorg, was recommended to us. So we went there twice by car, and we received very, very good advice. We exchanged our gold there, and the consultation was so good that we knew no matter what happens, we could always go back there. They will help us, yes. At that time, we were given advice regarding buying gold. Should we buy bars now? Should we buy coins? Should we get maple leaf or whatever else? And our preference then was maple leaf, and the advice was absolutely top-notch in that they said, yes, with this coin, you can't go wrong. Yes. At that particular point in our business journey, we simply didn't have the sufficient liquid capital or available cash reserves required to properly invest in the operation or facilitate the physical transport of the inventory to a secure bonded warehouse. Initially, we had invested it in various real estate opportunities, but that only happened much later on, specifically in Costa Rica. Furthermore, we eventually found out that the bonded warehouse located in Singapore actually offers significantly more favorable financial terms and conditions than those found in other places. For example, in Switzerland. And what that means in practical terms is that having better terms simply means they are much more affordable and cheaper in price for us. And in terms of security, I think we are also very, very well taken care of there. And that was the main reason. That's why we decided to go there. And a lot of people think they have to bury their not their money, but their precious metals somewhere in the garden. But nowadays, there are detectors that can go 100, 2, 3 meters or even more, you know. So in that respect, there is no security there. And I would say the safest way to store your precious metals is and remains 100% the duty-free warehouse. And we've already recommended it to others several times.
Yes, of course, we are always happy to hear that, especially from existing customers. Maybe you will be the next one to give us such a positive video and feedback about these positive aspects. And of course, regarding our products and our high security storage facilities, not only in Europe, but also in third countries, we are always pleased to hear from you. But perhaps let's take another general look at precious metals. Gold reached a new all-time high this year, even though it has recently dipped a bit. And that's exactly what is causing uncertainty for many people. Is this the right time, or is it perhaps already too late to invest in precious metals? Is it even still worth it? We are going to take a closer look at exactly this question now, and our market analyst Nicola has examined the current situation for you.
Yes, once again, many thanks to our regular customer for these fascinating insights. We talk daily with many of our regular customers who have emigrated, and they tell us some very, very exciting stories about how the whole process went. And of course, we're always happy when we can support them, when we're the right point of contact, or when at the end of the day, we can help make it all happen for them. But let's move away from the topic of emigration for a moment. Of course, that's also an exciting topic, but at least just as important are precious metal prices. Where could all of this be heading? So gold and silver. Max already mentioned it, new all-time high. The gold price has risen by around 50% in the last 12 months and silver by over 130%. The first reaction of many people, of course, is, am I too late? And today I want to answer that question and do so with data. Let's begin by looking at Ray Dalio, the highly influential billionaire investor and hedge fund manager, who has recently described the current global economic situation as a significant warning sign for the future. He often likes to meticulously compare current United States economic data with historical gold data, and in this particular instance, he specifically compared the total market value of all gold holdings found worldwide with the overall American money supply currently in circulation. This comparison serves as a critical metric for understanding the broader financial landscape we are facing today. And currently, the gold market value is over 170% of the US gold supply. And that's the highest value ever recorded. And this level has only occurred twice in history, in 1933 and 1980. And both periods were marked by a deep loss of confidence in the monetary system. In 1933, Americans were forced to hand over their gold to the government, and shortly after, the dollar was devalued by 40%. In 1980, inflation had reached nearly 14%, and gold had increased 20-fold in the 10 years prior. And Dale and Dalio say that gold is currently behaving as if something beneath the surface of the system is starting to break. So similar to 1933 and 1980, because we've currently reached the same level. And what makes this so interesting today? Well, we are not in a depression. At first glance, the economy still looks relatively stable. Nevertheless, central banks, institutions, and private investors are buying gold at a pace we've never seen before. And why is that? And the answer lies in the money supply. Because after 2020, central banks around the world pumped trillions into the system. The total money supply, that is the money people can quickly access and spend, briefly declined, but has been rising again for some time now. And that means, of course, there was, well, whether these were really reliable data, this brief decline in the money supply is questionable. But in any case, the curve is now rising sharply again. So a lot of money is still being printed, and the system is awash with liquidity. And a large part of this liquidity is supporting government debt. And US national debt now stands at over $38 trillion. And I did a bit more research and some calculations, and the total value of all gold reserves worldwide is also approaching $38 trillion, exactly the same value as the US national debt. And for 2 years, that grew much faster than gold, and now that has reversed. And you can also see this in the behavior of central banks, as I mentioned earlier. Previously, they bought around 400 to 600 tons of gold per year. And since 2022, that has increased to over 1,000 tons annually. That means the share of gold in central bank reserves worldwide has risen from 13%. This was around 2021 to over 24% today, and has thus almost overtaken US Treasury bonds as reserve assets. Yes, so there's not much left to go. Now, the only question is how this will continue to develop. But even at this point, you can see, or it can be observed, that central banks are increasingly offloading, or you could even say ignoring US Treasury bonds, and on the other hand, are choosing physical gold as a form of security. And this is exactly the point that surprises most people. Despite this increase, physical gold holdings by private investors in the US make up just 0.17% of all privately held financial assets. That means even after these price increases, gold is still massively underweighted in private portfolios. Yes, but it is very important to note, although it is significantly underweighted in many portfolios, this figure was actually even lower several years ago. That means you can also clearly observe here that the global demand for this asset has been rising at an exponential rate as well. In other words, more and more private customers are actively purchasing and choosing to invest their capital in gold. This means that not only institutions and central banks are now the main players, but private investors have also jumped on board. And what's interesting is that this very figure for private investors is really increasing, sometimes even from month to month now, because as you can also see from gold's performance, it shows where things could be heading in the future. So what does this mean specifically for price development and the overall outlook? As we've already mentioned, gold is currently also in a bit of a short breather. So right now, prices are between $4,600 and $4,500, which means we now have a very good phase to get into gold. And I see a possible correction zone here between $4,400 and $4,300. So it could pull back a little bit in the short term, but that's something you should definitely take advantage of right now, because we've already been well above $5,000. And in the long term, you have to take that into account as well. In the long term, we have exponential money creation. In the long term, we have huge amounts of money and mountains of debt, and let's say also conflicts and so on that won't be resolved quickly. Exactly. So that means that currently, if you look at the whole situation, there is a clear oversupply in the market. That means things have become a bit quieter. Exactly, please make use of these quiet phases, because as soon as things pick up again, the next super cycle will already be on its way. I also like to mention the silver price, which even reached $121 for a short time. And then, of course, there was a correction again. You could almost say a healthy correction. And you can clearly see that. And by carefully looking at the current silver price trends, you can almost already see exactly where things are likely headed over the very long term. Yes. And here too, I now see a support zone somewhere between $67 and $71. And then things will be pushed even further upward. That means correction phases are normal. Yes, and these are exactly the phases you should take advantage of, because that's where we are right now. So to the question of whether you are too late, no, definitely not. Yes. So take advantage of this opportunity. The money supply isn't decreasing, it's actually increasing. And these enormous mountains of debt can never be repaid.
Yes, thank you, Nicola. As we know, cash, as we've already heard, loses value and purchasing power over the years. But an equally important question, which you might also be asking yourself at home, or which others might ask, how much of my assets should I actually invest in precious metals? There are always different expert opinions circulating on this topic. Even among experts, there is no consensus whether, for example, it should be 10% or 50%. Nicola, based on your experience and your market analysis, how much do you actually recommend that our viewers, as well as new customers or perhaps existing customers, invest in precious metals like gold or silver?
Yes, that's a very good question. So how much gold do I actually really need, and where or how do I even start? Let's start with the general rule of thumb. You may have already heard them or you hear them everywhere, but the important thing is a lot is said on the internet as well. Of course, you shouldn't believe everything you hear on the internet. Instead, you have to form your own opinion to some extent. Most people recommend having about 10 to 30% of your total assets in precious metals. That's an honest guideline. I wouldn't fundamentally call it wrong, but it's just a guideline, not an answer. What's crucial isn't the percentage, but rather the question behind it. What is gold actually supposed to achieve in my portfolio? If it's about protecting purchasing power, that is, making sure your wealth isn't eaten up by inflation over decades, then gold is the most stable building block we know. If it's about flexibility, in other words, being able to access your wealth even in a new country or a new life situation, then physical gold is the answer. And when it comes to international storage, it's also unbeatable. And even when it comes to independence from the banking system, physical gold is the only instrument that truly provides that independence. And anyone who answers these questions for themselves automatically knows in which direction the allocation should go. What always occupies me in consultations is the idea of timing. Today, an average US household can, when it comes to stocks, gold price and current median income, buy just 0.7 ounces of gold per year. In 2011, however, when gold reached its then all-time high, and everyone said it was too expensive and already too late, but it was still well over 2 ounces. So you can see here what I'm actually getting at. And I remember a client who contacted us a few months ago. He waited for years, always hoping for a correction. When the price briefly dipped to $4,100, he preferred to wait to get in at $3,800. Today, the price is significantly higher again at over $4,500. But you also have to take his purchasing power into account again. It continued to decline due to inflation during the waiting period. That means those who wait for the perfect entry usually wait too long. And in the process, a bit of wealth is also eaten up by inflation. That's why my advice in practice is always the same. So not with a large amount all at once, which can be psychologically stressful if the price drops for 2 weeks or so, even if only temporarily, but rather build it up systematically. By that, I mean making regular purchases with different denominations so that you remain flexible. For example, if your washing machine breaks down, you have smaller denominations and don't have to sell a whole kilo bar right away. And simply structure the whole thing over time. And of course, also adjust everything to your current, that is your own life situation. And that naturally takes some of the pressure off as well. And the whole process is really simple with us. For example, if you set up a duty-free storage or even a regular storage facility with us here in Vienna, you can easily make additional purchases through our web shop whenever the price is right for you. Or if you've managed to save up some money, you can buy directly through our web shop, have it stored, and our colleagues here on site will take care of everything for you. That means you don't even have to be here in person. You can go on vacation and relax, enjoy the sun, enjoy a cocktail on the side, and we'll take care of all the work for you systematically and reliably time and again. And just a word about denominations, because that's often underestimated. With large bars, you're relatively inflexible. So if you need liquidity in an emergency, if you're moving or if you want to sell, you're better off with smaller denominations with a mix. So small coins and bars can be used in a targeted way and of course give you more flexibility in situations that you can't foresee right now. Silver, another important point about silver. Silver is a sensible complement to gold. That means more movement, stronger industrial demand on the other hand. And of course, at the moment, the price per ounce is also more affordable to get started. Most customers then consciously choose a combination of gold and silver. Gold as a stable core and silver as a supplement, because you can also see what silver is actually capable of both in terms of performance and when looking at the long term. That means most people have a long-term strategy. They invest because they want to protect their wealth and so that their assets aren't eaten up by inflation.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicola. But the next question, which of course many people might be asking themselves, or which is perhaps burning under many people's nails, is we've now talked about how much gold one should really invest or put aside. How much should you actually invest in gold? But an equally exciting question is, how can I best protect my wealth? Where can I store it most securely? And where can I best safeguard it? Especially when it comes to precious metals, it's not just about the value, but above all about security, access, and especially independence. Christian, what matters when it comes to proper storage, and where is gold truly safe? With your many years of experience as a storage expert.
That's exactly right. That's how it is. Those are the three most important points when buying gold.
The first one is obvious, that you actually do it. The second point was just mentioned as well, the denomination. And now we come to the third, truly very, very important point, namely, what is the right connection to my gold? How can I always have access to it? And at the same time, do I have security and flexibility? That is the core question, regardless of whether you emigrate or not, or whether you go on vacation or spend some time elsewhere, or overcome other circumstances. No matter what, you need the right connection to your goal. This is not a theoretical question. This is practice. This is reality. And in consultations with clients, I encounter this again and again. So this is basically the starting point. Most of the time, people buy gold. They take it home with them, and then they can't sleep anymore out of sheer fear that they might get robbed. Most of the time, of course, you don't actually get robbed, because otherwise everyone would have already lost everything. But still, the fear is justified. And believe me, I've already heard some real horror stories about this, not just here, but also from overseas and from people who have emigrated and so on. So these are some really tough experiences that people have had in some cases. What happens is that when people emigrate, many of them live in countries that certainly have many, many advantages and are very attractive. But at the same time, there is also a strong divide between rich and poor. That's the case. The difference can be enormous in some cases. And the value of gold in these countries takes on a completely different aspect, a completely different purchasing power. So word gets around quickly if someone has gold. And even if it was imported completely legally, it's the uncle of the brother-in-law's brother who works at customs, who then tells so-and-so that this person has such and so on. So they really don't want to deal with this risk. They don't even want to burden themselves with it. If they no longer feel safe, then they don't sleep well anymore. And that's not the right approach. The solution to this is the right connection that's already implied in the question. Then it's usually the case that people who come to me, maybe they've already emigrated or are planning to. And of course, very often, because they didn't want to keep it at home, their idea was to just store it in a safe deposit box right away. But while that's a good approach, but once you emigrate, it becomes difficult to access it. Because how are you supposed to access your safe deposit box from abroad? Apart from that, who do you give the key to? Who is even allowed to access it? And again, apart from that, it's actually not even really suitable for precious metals. We've already talked about this in previous episodes, what safe deposit boxes are actually meant for. But in any case, it's a complicated solution, not the ideal one. And if you ever urgently need money, it becomes even more difficult. So the best solution is the one where you can access it at any time, where you have the best connection to your gold, namely by being able to use it, not just owning it, but also being able to access it. And at the same time, it should be stored in such a way that it is secure. And ideally, no one knows about it who shouldn't know. And from our perspective, that is, of course, a high security vault. You live in the country of your choice, and there are many continents, many beautiful countries that are often much more exciting and much safer. By the way, I'd also like to point out that the whole wide world is much more beautiful and much safer than what you hear in the news, because unfortunately, they only ever report on the bad things. But people are much better, and the many countries are much more interesting than you might think. So let's take that step. But now I'm already digressing from the topic. The point is that if you store it with us in a high security vault, no one will know about it who isn't supposed to know, but you still always have it in the background. It's like your silent companion. You can access it at any time. And I know there are many people who could confirm this right now. And if it's an international bonded warehouse, then you can also buy tax-free silver there, meaning at 0% tax. And of course, you can also sell it tax-free. And what also comes into play is that in many countries where people emigrate to, and these countries are really great, there often isn't, let's say, a good gold infrastructure. Because you don't just want to own it, you also want to be able to sell it if you ever need money. And preferably at legitimate prices on a normal, reputable market. And that's not the case in many countries. In many countries, such a market doesn't even exist. But with us, if you have it stored in the high security vault, you can sell it at any time at fair and transparent prices. That can be checked at any time, instantly. You always see the spot prices, meaning the global market prices for the metals. And then you see the buying prices and the selling prices. Then that is very, very transparent. There are no voodoo prices and no secret forbidden surcharges or anything like that. So make your life simple and uncomplicated. Focus on your goals, on your new home. Meet nice people. Blend in a little with the society. Learn something new there. You likely have many important things and personal goals that you want to focus on right now, but you certainly don't need to constantly worry about your own security simply because you have the high security storage solution and your precious metals are always readily available to you whenever you need them. So this is the right combination, and this is the solution we recommend to you.
Yes, Christian, you just brought up another important point. You mentioned it just now, the topic of bonded warehouses, which is, of course, a major issue in gold supply within our company, or rather, it's an important aspect, not only in Europe, but also in third countries. Christian, maybe you could briefly explain to us how exactly bonded warehouses work in Europe and around the world.
Exactly. So when I say Europe, I am specifically referring to the EU for now. A lot has changed there, and I will get to all of that in just a moment. First of all, I want to put your minds at ease a bit to take away the worry, the fear that it's all so complicated. It's actually not difficult at all to understand the whole thing. So how does something like this work? You simply buy gold or silver as usual. In this case, I'm talking about our company. You buy it from us in our web shop, specifically in the web shop for the respective country where you want to have your storage. You place your order in the corresponding web shop, and instead of having it delivered to your home or picking it up yourself, we book it directly into one of the selected high security vaults for you. And as already mentioned, there are many locations internationally. And quite a few of our vaults, in fact, most of our international vaults are at the same time duty-free warehouses. So every duty-free warehouse is also a high security vault. The duty-free aspect relates to tax treatment. And if you want to buy silver tax-free, for example, since silver is subject to VAT in many countries, then you select duty-free storage in the shop and purchase it accordingly, 0% taxes. And now what does the drinker say? Everything. Now I still don't know. How do I get access to such a vault? And that's exactly why we've made a short video for you about setting up storage, which we're going to show you now.
Would you like to store your precious metals securely? But how does it actually work? We'll show you step by step in just a few minutes. Go to goldvorsorg.com and click on Storage in the menu at the top. Scroll down a bit and click on Set up Storage Now. Don't have an account yet? No problem, you can register right here. Already a customer? Then simply log in with your credentials. In the next step, enter your personal information. Name, date of birth, address. That's it. This information is used solely to verify your identity. Then choose your storage location. We are happy to advise you on this. Finally, just upload your photo ID. and you're done. Your personal high-security storage is set up. Professional, independent from banks, and absolutely secure.
That's exactly right. And that's basically how it works. It's super easy to set up your storage. And the second part of this whole process is, of course, a consultation, because you will certainly have questions. Everyone has different circumstances. Everyone has a different life situation. And these can be clarified very, very well in a personal consultation. Of course, this can also be done by email, by phone, or as mentioned, in person at one of our advisory offices, not only in Austria, but also in Germany and beyond. And there you can ask any other questions you may have. Believe me, we can clarify all of that. Now, just once again, in general, because yes, the question was about bonded warehouses. From an understanding standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to know that every bonded warehouse is also a high security warehouse. That's what's important. The duty-free aspect is simply a matter of taxation, because technically speaking, in this case, the silver has not yet been imported. So that's separate. From a customs perspective, it's considered outside the territory. In a bonded warehouse, you can do business tax-free. You can buy tax-free and, of course, sell at any time without VAT coming into play. So completely tax-free and no tax on profits either, as long as you observe the holding period of at least 1 year, at least for Germans and Austrians. And if you come from another country, then just check with your tax advisor about the rules for your tax obligations and clarify that as well. And now I don't know how many times I've already said the word tax. And it's really pouring out of me now, because I have to share something important with you once again. Because we've also been dealing a lot with the topic of taxes in the past few days. Due to recent events, there has actually been a new regulation in Germany for a short time now, or more precisely since the 9th April. And the German Ministry of Finance has tightened the rules for precious metals in German bonded warehouses. Surprisingly, it must be said, without any prior announcement. So specifically, this means anyone who, as a private customer in Germany, wants to newly purchase silver or other precious metals into a bonded warehouse will now also have to pay value-added tax. The previous tax advantage is, so to speak, a thing of the past. Gold remains excluded anyway, because, to be precise, the tax rate on gold is 0. Not tax-free, it's simply that the tax rate is set to 0. And that's why this doesn't affect gold at all anyway. Silver, platinum, technology metals, rare earths, they will lose from now on, as of April 9th, this advantage already when purchasing into a German bonded warehouse. This advantage, but all customers, so you don't need to worry now, all customers who have already stored their goods with us tax-free in Frankfurt, that is, those who made their purchase before April 9th, this is very important, they are not affected. So your silver remains tax-free. This is also explicitly stated in the regulation. And if you want to sell your silver again at some point in the future, it will also apply to you then. As before, still no value-added tax applies. This only concerns new purchases. These are now subject to tax in Frankfurt, just to be clear. And of course, we always have a solution for you. In fact, we have a very simple solution for you. We have several international locations. For many reasons, including this one, we have set up internationally because our locations are in different economic systems that still exist. And there are many possibilities, starting with Switzerland, and as we've already heard today, Singapore, or of course also in the Emirates, in Dubai, and so on, as well as in North America and the Caribbean. And none of these are affected by this German regulation. So anyone who wants to buy and store silver without value-added tax can still do so, quite simply outside of Germany. There are many other advantages to high security storage and bonded warehouses. I would be happy to send you more information about this. Just write to us. We have summarized all the many advantages in an overview. We are happy to send it to you. If you have any further questions, we look forward to hearing from you. And then we can discuss everything with you in detail.
Thank you very much, Christian. And as already mentioned, now it's time for your questions. Now, of course, we also have our big Q&A session. But first, I would like to once again recommend our gold hotline to you. You can reach us at 431, 330, 50, 33, and 2. Just press 4. You are, of course, welcome to contact us at any time, whether you want information about our gold investment products or anything else. Or if you have any questions about precious metals, no problem, just give us a call. Our customer advisors are, of course, always happy to assist you with advice and support. So as mentioned, we now come to our big Q&A here in our gold webinar. Many questions have already been asked over the past 1.5 hours, and hopefully all have been answered in detail. But now our experts are once again available to answer your questions. And we already have some questions on hand. So let's jump right in with the first question. What exactly is meant by this commodity super cycle? Maybe let's direct this question straight to Nicola.
Thank you very much. Yes, a commodity super cycle, definitely a wonderful term. This is an unusually strong upward phase in prices, usually triggered by changes in the global economy. I always like to use an example from our industry. There are many commodities, for example, silver. Silver, whose price in the last strong cycle rose to over $110 per ounce in a short period of time. That is exactly a super cycle. And in the meantime, there were also counter movements. And that's normal. And it's always very important to make sure you take advantage of these counter movements as well. And it's precisely such developments or such super cycles often arise when countries start building up large reserves or when central banks once again buy gold on a massive scale, which of course significantly increases demand. Additionally, geopolitical tensions and high levels of debt drive people to seek refuge in commodities, further reinforcing such a so-called super cycle. By the way, that just came to mind. We also had a great webinar on the topic of super cycles. You can find it in our knowledge section in our web shop. There you can watch the whole thing again. In it, we took a closer look, especially at the super cycle in silver.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicola. And we've already received a follow-up question from a viewer. Why is Trump's oil policy so important for gold investors in the first place?
Very good question. Trump's oil policy is, you have to say, very clever and well thought out. And it's also very important for gold investors because oil is directly related to inflation, interest rates, and geopolitical tensions. And all of this, in a way, drives things forward. And these are exactly the factors that gold reacts to, or rather gold also reacts to these factors. And Trump's strategy of drill, baby, drill is actually quite cleverly conceived, because more domestic production means more control over energy flows and thus also more geopolitical influence. And at the same time, he also strategically uses countries like Venezuela, which has enormous oil reserves, to deliberately influence and expand supply and power dynamics. And gold and oil are always the central players in this. Why? Because they are limited resources. And these limited resources usually compete for first place. Sometimes it's oil, then it's gold again. And whoever owns these two reserves or resources also has power, security, and prosperity. And it is precisely these interventions and tensions that then drive uncertainty and inflation again. And in the long run, that plays into gold's hands. In the end, you have to say, Trump usually bets on oil, and many investors, on the other hand, bet on gold. And who wants to follows along? The whole thing then relaxes somewhere on the beach with a cocktail and a huge gold reserve, regardless of what Trump does with his oil policy.
Now we have a really interesting question here. Should I, as an entrepreneur, prepare for precious metals differently than as a private individual? Maybe Christian.
Yes, well, I would say basically preparing with precious metals is becoming increasingly important. Whether that's within a company or privately, theoretically, it doesn't matter. That's a fundamental issue. As I said, the important thing is to actually do it. Buy gold privately or as a company. You just have to make sure that As a business, you discuss everything properly with a good tax advisor so that you do everything correctly. Check marks. In English, people always say check all the boxes. Here we say up hacking, meaning you've done all your homework correctly from a tax perspective. That's the first point. And the second point is for private individuals, so we're mainly talking about taxpayers in Austria and Germany, profits are tax-free after 1 year of holding, according to the holding period rule. For businesses, it's a different story. You have to pay taxes on it as a company. Your expert will tell you how that works, but we generally recommend that everyone take the private route if possible, because it's simpler for you. As a company, you also don't have to pay VAT since you get the tax refunded. But I would say don't overthink it, gold or not gold, but rather then consider whether to buy it as a company or as a private individual. I think that's perhaps the more important question. And you can discuss this with an expert and then take advantage of the benefits accordingly. But the advantages of gold are independent of whether it's for a company or for private use. That's how I would approach it.
Now we have another very interesting question in our chat. If everything is so uncertain, why do stocks keep rising anyway?
Wow, you really have to elaborate a bit here because you have to bring the truth back into the present a little. Everything is being extremely exaggerated everywhere. So much uncertainty because there's always something going on. There's a new webinar every hour somewhere talking about the end of the world. At least that's how it seems to me. But believe me, the world isn't ending yet. It's not going to end for a long time. That's just advertising, a way to get a bit of attention. But let's stay grounded in reality. Without being too sarcastic, we're actually living in one of the best times because there's unlimited money printing going on. That's just how it is from a monetary history perspective. It's the best of times. And no one can go bankrupt. And of course, it's true that stocks are only rising because they're benefiting from this development. So in uncertain times, stocks just keep rising and rising. So we need to bring ourselves back to reality and consider what's going on with all this money printing is happening and the markets are changing as well. In the past, we've already held detailed webinars where we really dissected the financial system, the monetary system, breaking it down into all its individual components. The bond market, which boomed for a long time and kept going up, has now passed its peak, to put it mildly, because the zero interest rate phase has completely destroyed it. What happened? Of course, the money that used to flow into bonds is now moving into the stock markets. And so we can check things off one by one again, because the zero interest rate phase, of course, ruined the savings account, the beloved old savings account that all Austrians love so much. Naturally, the money from the savings accounts has gone into the stock markets. And you can see this play out across all parts of the financial system. In the end, it's always been the stock markets that have benefited. The real estate crisis also drove money into stocks. And now many already know what I'm about to say. I'm not a fan of crypto. The recent crashes in crypto have also pushed money further into stocks. So stocks shouldn't brag, saying, I'm so great. Well, no wonder. It's not exactly rocket science. But there will come a time when stocks will quiet down again. They will go quiet. So these are uncertain times. And now to move into stocks, that would be the wrong decision.
It's also very important to mention here, as you pointed out, that a downturn in stocks will also put some pressure on companies, because if you look at the debt situation, it's not just the government that's in debt. Companies are also highly indebted on the other hand. And that could, of course, also cause a bit of turbulence at that level. And essentially, as Christian mentioned, this is the classic shifting of money. So as soon as, for example, from one asset, if everything goes down the drain there, it gets shifted to the other side, because investors on the other side are also looking at where can they achieve the fastest and best profits. And those are usually the big players. Strangely enough, it's the big players who move their assets the fastest, and they shift everything into stocks. So you have to take that into account, just as you do in the other direction. They also quickly pull liquidity out of stocks and shift it back into gold. Exactly. So it's always a kind of battle between gold and stocks.
Exactly. And maybe one more comment from me. I have absolutely nothing against stocks, on the contrary. And if you know your way around, if you are an expert, or if you deal with the topic so thoroughly that you become an expert, by all means, go ahead and do it in the short term. I also like going to the casino sometimes. Yes, so you can always gamble, but you just have to know when. The right moment is perhaps when you stop again or take a step back, or how far you even get involved in the whole thing. And if you have a responsibility towards others or a family and so on, then I would behave a bit more conservatively. But I'm not your stock expert. I don't want to talk you out of it, but I also have my personal opinion, which I sometimes share. And I see it from a conservative perspective. But everyone can also get involved with stocks. They might keep going up for a while, but then they'll go down, and then everyone will look at things very differently again.
Another very interesting question that we've also received from our viewers: how does consulting work in Hungary? Is it like in Vienna? So is it personal or almost discreet? Maybe this question is also for you, Lilita.
So in Hungary, it works exactly the same, almost identical to Vienna. You have to imagine it like this. Our branch is located in a commercial building with 10 floors. We are currently located way up on the 8th floor, where you can very comfortably and conveniently take the elevator up without a single person ever noticing exactly where you are actually headed for your final destination. Within our branch, there are private rooms where you can take care of everything in a very calm atmosphere without anyone noticing what is being discussed. So everything is really very, very peaceful and quiet, ensuring that your visit remains entirely discreet. So I can only recommend it. It's also actually very easy to find. Is that a very good Budapest location where we are? It is important for you to understand that we are also fully integrated into the entire GV system. We can also offer international storage solutions, and practically all the products that GVS offers, we have in Budapest.
Yes, thank you very much. Another very exciting question that we just received: if AI replaces jobs and the state pays a basic income, is that good or bad for gold?
Yes, I believe the question is directed at me because I have already dealt with this topic very intensively. And who knows whether the dear customer who just asked us this question has seen the same videos as I have. It's really quite impressive when you look at these, I don't know what the right term is, these factories. When you look at them, these factories that are now springing up everywhere, even in China, where there is no more light because everything is operated by robots, and robots are being produced there, not 5 or 10 or hundreds. So it really is. The question is, you mustn't forget what's currently developing there. This is actually a huge change for all of us. That's the excitement, the real excitement of our time. Namely, how soon will there only be robots walking around? And what will we do then? Many people might not have a job anymore. And then the topic of basic income will very quickly become the most exciting and important question, because people shouldn't have to starve either. And somehow you also want to keep the system running. So this question is extremely relevant right now. And the topic of basic income will also, in the next, be at the center of all discussions. And then we'll see how things go from there. People will just earn a little less. And then in parallel, there will be digital monetary systems. These will also come hand in hand with everything else, where it will be monitored how you spend, how you use your money. And if you are on basic income, you will probably only be allowed to spend your money within a certain area. But if you go to work, then you can spend it anywhere. And all these aspects play a role here. And now the question is, what will happen with gold? That's a great question, but I can answer it very simply. Regardless of whether robots do the work or we do, these monetary systems will continue to exist, whether there are many poor people and a few rich ones or a large middle class. All in all, money will always flow into gold. The total amount does not change. And that's why when it comes to gold, it will continue to serve as a store of value as it has for thousands of years, and it will continue to do so for many, many years into the future. So regardless of basic income and AI, gold will maintain its significance and become increasingly important. But the question itself, people really need to engage much more with this topic and consider what is coming their way. Thank you for the question.
One more very important thing, since you mentioned gold, and I just saw a picture of the silver ounce as well. This is also a very important point when we talk about AI, because in the electronics industry alone, 200 to 300 million of those silver ounces we just saw in the picture are used every year. And just imagine that, 200 to 300 million ounces per year. And a large portion of that also goes into the expansion of AI. This shows the significance that silver holds in this category as well. And how then the long-term development of the price will depend on the demand for silver. Yes, because you won't need less. More and more silver is needed for expansion. And perhaps we are already at 200 to 300 million. In the future, we will even need 500 million. One must always take that into account. Both silver and gold are finite, so there is no such thing as an infinite amount. Accordingly, I am sure that the price will also change quite a bit in the future, or rather in the long term.
Yes, exactly. Just once more, please repeat what you just said. With silver, this extremely increasing demand from the industrial side explains this raw material. Super cycles, which we keep seeing with silver, because this market is decoupling from its previous behavior. So you know that it will be the next super cycle. It's probably already just around the corner. I'm cautious with predictions.
The important thing is we still have enough silver and gold. That means we are fully prepared for these challenging times and also ready for the entire industry. So just get in touch with our team, give us a call or drop by and get ready for the robots.
Exactly, the robots are coming. The price will simply change. So the supply is secured, but the prices will be somewhere else. Well, that's just the market.
Yes, Christian, you already mentioned an important point earlier about stocks and portfolios, or also ETFs. Now, we also have a question about that. I have gold ETFs in my portfolio. Isn't that enough? What's your opinion, your assessment on that?
It's always a question of convenience. Everyone has to answer that for themselves. I'll say in normal times, we're still somewhat in normal times, and a gold ETF is convenient, but it's not the same as physical gold, because with an ETF, you have a claim that's a financial claim, but the physical is actual ownership of the metal. And there really is a huge difference in times of stress. So in normal phases, maybe this difference doesn't really show up. And the ETF is also practical for trading, for speculating, if you like. But physical gold, that's a completely different category, a whole different league, because that's asset protection. And no one should confuse that. So if you want to have some excitement from speculating, go for ETFs if you like. But if you also have a responsibility towards others and towards your own future, and you want to be crisis-proof, then you should definitely stick with physical gold. So for me, that's the huge difference.
It's also very important to mention here, since we are also on that side, in my case, I'm personally involved in wholesale for ETFs, or rather for gold ETFs, you also need to have certain knowledge. That's also very important, because it's easy to make a mistake with just one wrong click on a platform. So even if you do that, you always have to inform yourself beforehand. Of course, it's more convenient and all that, but it's also more prone to errors, which you have to take into account. That means investing or putting your money into physical gold is very simple. You just make an appointment with Christian, and then it's simply an exchange. You could almost call it an old-fashioned trade.
Exactly, because with an ETF, it's like being in a casino. If you've ever played roulette in a casino, you know the phrase, no more bets. So the wheel spins, and then whatever lands, that's what you get, and then the number comes up or it doesn't. That's just speculation. But with physical assets, I would say, yes, it's great if you also get an extra speculative gain, but the primary motivation absolutely has to be wealth protection, security.
Nicola, you already mentioned and partly explained this in the webinar, but now the question has come up again. Why does gold rise in the long term, even though there are always setbacks in between?
Yes, quite simply, it's not that gold suddenly becomes more valuable, but rather that our money loses purchasing power over time and becomes less valuable. That means the debt levels are growing and realistically can never be fully repaid. And at the same time, major reforms are necessary because the global system needs to be reorganized. And that's exactly what creates long-term pressure toward tangible assets. But it's important to note that it can't always just go up. That also needs to be taken into account. We've seen the same thing with silver. It did reach the $120 mark, but then it also experienced a pullback or a pause. That means it also needs to take a break sometimes. Just imagine if the price kept going up all the time, then the system would come under pressure too quickly and could possibly collapse rapidly as well. That's why these pullbacks are completely normal and actually present opportunities to buy in at a lower price. But what's crucial, and this was also mentioned in the question, is to take a long-term perspective, to look at the whole thing over the long run and not let short-term fluctuations or pullbacks unsettle you. It's about protecting your assets, and asset protection is always better in the long term than panicking in the short term because of pullbacks or similar events.
All right, then we have another question. The topic of stocks, especially for you, Christian, seems to be keeping you busiest today. Here we have another question from a viewer. Should I sell gold during a crash and buy stocks cheaply?
Great question. Now we have someone who is really already thinking ahead about the future, about what things will look like afterwards. But we're not at that point yet. So with this question, we've basically entered a parallel universe. But of course, you don't keep gold forever. It doesn't make sense to have gold just for the sake of having it. It's not a piece of furniture. You want to get something out of it after all. And if such a situation actually arises, the question is, should we switch to stocks now? So if the monetary system, once the monetary system is actually reformed, and we're still a long way from that whole story, when everything is debt-free, so to speak, reset has happened, and there have already been many, many monetary systems that have renewed themselves, and this process will keep repeating. Then you basically start over again. And if everything is debt-free at that point, and there are also high interest rates, well then, should you and can you, of course, use gold for that to enter into the new monetary system? We are far from that point. Right now, we are in an exponential phase of money printing, taking on debt with inflation that is rising. And the so-called crash that everyone keeps talking about, that's not going to happen tomorrow either, because the whole system still wants to continue living on in this way for quite a while, as it is still very stable. But when the time finally comes, then you use your gold. After all, it's there. Then you build something new for yourself, but it's not that far yet.
Maybe another really interesting question from a viewer, or rather from a female viewer, perhaps directed at Nicola. What happens when the credit bubble bursts? Will gold and silver definitely rise then?
Yes, thank you for the question in any case. Well, there are actually a lot of possible scenarios. So the most important thing is not what happens or if something happens, but that you have to react and therefore react now. Because when it happens, it's usually already too late if something happens. But back to the credit bubble. A credit bubble actually arises from, or rather, what is a credit bubble anyway? It arises from the fact that there are more loans in the system overall than are actually backed by real money. So a constant growing level of debt is being built up. And when such a phase turns, like during the financial crisis in 2008, many over-indebted companies often go bankrupt because they can't handle higher interest rates or falling demand. They can no longer cope with the lack of demand. And at the same time, the system doesn't completely collapse, but instead pressure is regularly released and the system is stabilized with new money. That's completely normal. And situations like these are in a way also anticipated because the decision makers in the system know that these cycles exist. We've already experienced it. These cycles will happen again. And then if something like this happens once more, liquidity will simply be injected again if necessary. As a result, a lot of capital flows from other areas, such as savings accounts, bonds, or bankruptcies, into gold or even into the stock markets, as we've already heard today. That means it's simply this financial shift within the markets. And stocks also can't arise indefinitely, as we've already heard. Instead, they keep getting inflated by this additional money and continue to rise in price accordingly. And many companies are heavily indebted during such phases because in times of low interest rates, it was normal to take out a loan. Others, on the other hand, operate more consciously. For example, as a trading company, we have no debt. For example, we also don't have any leased vehicles or anything like that. That means we don't look at event scenarios or think about event scenarios. A credit bubble can come if it wants to. That won't affect us at the end of the day. For many others, it's a different story. And in the end, the money just keeps moving between the systems and it's already priced in. So that means a bit is pumped out of the system, then pumped back in, pumped out, and pumped back in again. And at the end of the day, it will mostly affect the next generation because they will really feel the impact of all this and see what consequences it all has. But at the end of the day, here again, physical gold on the other hand, this is not a system promise or anything like that. It's truly real security, something you can't just inflate or let shoot up without limit. You can also create unlimited new shares. But on the other hand, gold is not unlimited. And that's exactly what's important. That means no matter how much air is let out, with physical gold, you can sit back and relax, even if the system deflates.
Now we have another question about our Hungarian branch. And this question is directed straight to Melitta. Can I have a gold bar sent to me in Hungary?
A lot of people ask this question. And basically, the answer is yes. At GVS, we have our own transport delivery system. All these shipments are insured. It's not as simple as a regular package from Amazon. It's a precious metal shipment, so it's insured. You receive what's called a tracking number, and you can easily track when the goods will arrive and where they are located. And of course, there are security standards in place. But in addition, when it comes to larger quantities, we've had this quite often in Hungary, there are also individual delivery options. You can plan for that. With larger shipments or higher amounts, it's possible to arrange for personal pickup and delivery, either from us to the customer or vice versa. Everything is possible.
Thank you very much. Now we have another question that deals with the bigger picture, so to speak. You could say it concerns things on a global scale as well. So does that mean gold doesn't protect you at all if things really collapse? Maybe this question is also for Christian.
Thank you for the question. Yes, if things collapse, yes, I assume what is meant is if the monetary system collapses, that is the financial system, the monetary system. As I mentioned earlier, the monetary system has many different aspects. And usually it's not that everything collapses at once, rather certain parts will break down. They will collapse. For example, there will be another real estate crash and then the real estate market will be gone again for a while. Or there will be another crash in the interest rate system and the banks will collapse if you want to look at it that way. Savings accounts have long since collapsed, to use that word once again. And bonds have also already collapsed so far. And stocks, they haven't crashed yet, but their time will come as well. I won't say it anymore now. But that's why the answer, of course, is, well, what remains when everything else disappears, to use that word? Of course, gold and silver remain. And that protects you when everything else has collapsed. And recently, a gold chain was found somewhere on a Greek island. It was probably forgotten there around 2000 BC. And now it has been found. It still looks good after 4,000 years. In 4,000 years, it still looks great. And that's why gold and silver remain when everything else has disappeared. And that is the true value of preservation. It will be the same in the future. So I can reassure you about that. In fact, the exact opposite is true. That's exactly why people protect themselves with gold. In the event that everything else collapses, that's what I would recommend to you.
Now we also have a question about energy, maybe directly to Nicola. Why does energy suddenly become such an important investment in a crisis?
Well, in a crisis, energy, especially oil, suddenly becomes important because it shows how dependent we are on something scarce. The whole system, actually, everything and everyone is dependent on energy. And as already mentioned, you can see in the long term how quickly everything can change. At one point, you could fill up your car for 70 euros. Now it's already over 120 euros. And when there are shortages, prices go up because without energy, nothing works, no production, no transport. Everything basically depends on it. Whether this happens intentionally or simply due to circumstances doesn't matter in the end. It simply creates uncertainty in the market. And it's precisely in such phases that scarce assets like gold and silver become interesting again, because you know that no one can simply increase their supply. They are limited. But it's also important to note that rising oil prices also fuel inflation. And on the other hand, this supports precious metal prices again. That means, of course, you could consider investing in energy now, including oil. But the whole thing is much more complicated. You really need to know what you're doing or have a good advisor who understands the whole subject. There are so many factors involved: costs, storage, transport, regulations. It's not something you can just quickly invest in. Otherwise, in the worst case, it can happen that at some point, you might get a reminder by email asking why you still haven't picked up your barrel of oil from America. Accordingly, most people prefer to go for the simpler and more stable option of gold and silver. That definitely requires less know-how. In theory, a single phone call is enough to invest in gold and silver. And of course, you can also invest in energy. But for that, you really need to be informed and know what you're doing.
Exactly, because when you invest in energy, you're investing in a company, whereas with gold, you're investing in something that has intrinsic value. There's a world of difference between the two. That's simply the big difference, whether you want to have counterparty risk or not. This is also a recurring theme that runs like a common thread through the various topics today.
Maybe, Christian, I'll direct the next question straight to you and phrase it a bit more pointedly. Here's a question that was asked: should I rather buy energy stocks instead of gold?
Exactly. That's another great question, because people are naturally concerned about these things and are thinking about the topics everyone is talking about right now. The topic of energy is an absolutely current top-level issue because around the world, it's about conflicts over energy, raw materials, and everything that involves limited resources. And now, regarding the question of whether to buy energy stocks rather than gold, here you have two completely different worlds once again. One is part of the financial system, the paper system, and you really need to know your way around it. If you know your way around, if you seek advice, if you know what you're doing, then yes, you can do it in the short term. There's nothing wrong with that. We've already talked about stocks today and also why they always go up, precisely because of the financial system we have, because of this exponential growth. With gold, it's a completely different story. At some point, the monetary system will no longer exist. And financial and paper-based systems will also disappear at some point, and they will renew themselves. And even currency unions have an expiration date. And so these stocks, which are part of the paper system, will follow the same path. Gold, on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, has existed for thousands of years and will probably still exist thousands of years from now. So the fundamental question is, do I want security, or do I want to go to the casino, or do I want to gamble? Gambling is a harsh word. You can certainly invest in stocks, but you need to know what you're doing.
If I may jump in here, I tend to be more of a numbers person, a data person. Just looking at the market capitalization of the top assets, gold is by far number one compared to all the companies, with a market capitalization of 27 trillion euros. And Nvidia is in second place with 4.3 trillion. So you can already see how big the gap is between a finite resource based on a real asset, gold, compared to a stock. And what's really interesting is that even silver is in fourth place. By now, it has already overtaken Apple, Microsoft, and other companies in terms of market capitalization. And I can also imagine that it will move toward gold and eventually take second place.
That's exactly how the development will move in that direction. But everyone can draw their own conclusions. Thinking long term, I would rather go for a limited resource. Short term, maybe paper, but that's something everyone has to decide for themselves.
And now we have another question, again, thematically related to Hungary. Maybe this one is for you too, Melitta. Can I buy more anonymously in Hungary than in Vienna, or is it the same as in all the other branches in Austria in terms of identification?
I'll be completely honest with you. Hungary is not a loophole. The rules are similar to those in Austria. We're operating in Europe, that is in the EU, to put it simply. That means there are clear anti-money laundering regulations. And above certain amounts, you also have to identify yourself, including with us. Whether it's Vienna or Budapest, the rules are not set by GBS, but are prescribed by the state. So smaller amounts are straightforward. For larger amounts, we require identification, meaning an ID card. But we place an extremely high value on discretion, and your data is handled very carefully. With us, nothing gets passed on, nothing is talked about much. And throughout this entire process, everything happens calmly and professionally. And in my experience, customers have absolutely no problem with that. They understand that it has to be this way. So in this respect, a clean documented structure is also something good. And in the long run, it also provides more security, both in terms of taxes and legally. So we have no issues with this with our customers. The customers have no problem with it. It has to be this way, and we place a great deal of importance on it.
Yes, thank you very much. Another question that also concerns our viewers is, what should I do with my pension plan or life insurance? Employers, what is your assessment here? What would you recommend in this case?
Yes, thank you for the question. I sense a certain uncertainty here, and of course that's justified. Especially in recent years, there have already been many cases involving these pension funds. In Italy and also in Sweden, we've reported on this as well, where some of these funds have gone bankrupt or had to make significant reductions. Because these funds, they invest or have invested a lot in the past, that's all. It's a paper system, for example, invested in bonds, which nobody wants anymore today because they've lost their value due to the whole interest rate situation with zero interest rates and so on, and now rising rates. Long story short, it's always the same issue. It's a paper system. The various pension funds and life insurance policies, of course, are all part of this paper system. You should not spend too much time dwelling upon the past. Instead, ensure that you have every single detail calculated quite thoroughly, carefully evaluate exactly what it is truly worth, and then reach a final decision in your own mind. As we have already discussed here today, the common thread is simply this. One is built entirely on paper, while the other possesses a great deal of intrinsic value itself. And if you want to have a simple life where you don't have to worry, then in the future, gold and silver will always be the right choice for you. But when it comes to handling your existing products, have the calculations done for you. There are experts for that. But never forget, these are always paper-based systems. And especially with life insurance, I have to tell you, I already mentioned it earlier today, we have this LV2Gold.com, or take a look at it, LV2 Gold. I don't want to give too much away, but once you've read what's written there, you'll already have your answers.
Yes, thank you very much, Christian. Now, of course, we also have an interesting question more in the political direction. A question perhaps for you, Nicola. Why do politicians actually dislike a gold standard?
Very good question. The answer is actually quite simple. A gold standard limits political leeway, significantly, one must say. When money is tied to gold, the state can't simply create unlimited new currency or print new money to cover deficits, fulfill campaign promises, or finance these massive EU rescue packages. And that's exactly why in our industry, when we talk about a gold standard, we sometimes refer to it as golden handcuffs. And it's a system that does provide security, but at the same time greatly restricts freedom. For citizens, this can be positive because purchasing power remains more stable and is less devalued. That's a very big advantage. For decision makers, on the other hand, like the central bank, it's very inconvenient because they are much less able to react flexibly to crises or provide money at the push of a button. And in our current system, that's different. Deficits can be financed quickly, which feels pleasant in the short term, but in the long run leads to debt and inflation. That's exactly the big problem. And that means a gold standard would force more discipline and would precisely limit this leeway for unlimited money printing. That's why we say you don't have to wait until the system slows itself down or anything else. Simply become independent yourself with physical gold. Position yourself outside of this system, and the question remains, will a gold standard ever return? That remains the question.
Exactly. And here I'd really like to highlight the most important point when it comes to buying gold. The single most important point when buying gold, it's that you actually do it. You might laugh now, but it's about actually doing it. There are so many people who are always talking about gold, but then come 1,000 excuses, the gold standard or not, or this and that. Don't let yourself get distracted by these things. If you want security, then buy it regularly. Gold, no matter what else is happening all around, do it if you want to do it, because then you've taken the most important step. Whether the gold standard comes or not, don't speculate, focus on security. That's what you want. That's what's more important, at least in my opinion.
Now, we actually have a very direct question for advice, I would almost say, dear Christian, which has been addressed directly to you from our loyal viewers. So here it is. Should I invest my money in tokenized gold or stick with traditional physical gold?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because we live in a time where you constantly hear that everything is supposed to be tokenized, these anglicisms. You need a marketplace for that. You need someone who will actually take these tokens off your hands. In other words, a buyer. If you don't have one, then even the fanciest USB stick is useless to you, no matter how many tokens are stored on it. But perhaps I can also answer your question with the example of the Greek island I mentioned earlier, where just a week or two ago, they found a piece of gold jewelry. It is 4,000 years old, 4,000 years. And this gold jewelry, look it up yourself, you can Google it. This gold jewelry is worth just as much today as it was back then, if not much more. And now, in 4,000 years in the future, this gold jewelry will likely still have value. But I can guarantee you that in 4,000 years, no one will care about your tokens anymore. Because by then, even in 400 years, or probably even in 40 years, hardly anyone will care about it anymore, because technology will have advanced, the plastic will have broken down, and who knows what else will have happened. But gold will still be just as valuable in 4,000 years in the future. So I think I've already given you the answer with the example of the Greek island.
Sorry to interrupt at this point. Tokens are, once again, promises. That's also a very important point. You've probably never actually seen these tokens, except maybe in some electronic form on your phone or something like that. You've never really laid eyes on them. The question is whether you'll ever actually see them in person in case you ever want to redeem them. On the other hand, physical gold, you can see it, you can feel it, you can even go to sleep with your physical gold next to you. So from that perspective, it's not a promise, it's a real security. And then you have to decide again, do you want real security, or, as Christian always likes to say, do you want to play poker? Gambling, exactly gambling.
Yes, Christian. Now we have another very interesting question for you from one of our dedicated viewers. If China eventually introduces a new gold-backed yuan currency, what exactly would that significant development mean for the physical gold that I currently hold in Austria?
Yes, for your gold and for my gold and for all of our gold, that would, of course, be the absolute best thing ever, because prices would go through the roof. Yes, because in fact, what would happen is that everyone would want this gold-backed currency, and actually they would want the gold itself. And the world is enormous, but even so, it would have incredible consequences here for us as well. But that is not going to happen, because the currency that is backed by gold would be self-destructive for the Chinese themselves, because they need, let's say, a monetary cycle, a reasonable one at that. At most, such a gold backing might happen in very small steps or something like that, but not all at once, because that would cause the economic cycles to collapse. But to answer your question, nothing better could happen for your gold in Austria.
Perhaps another general question that we've just received. Can the state confiscate gold again like it did in America in the past? Maybe this one is also for you, Nicola.
So historically speaking, there have indeed been cases where states intervened more heavily in gold ownership. The most well-known example, as mentioned in the question, is America. This all happened in 1933. I've already explained this a bit in the webinar, and all of this took place during the Great Depression. At that time, citizens had to hand over their gold at a fixed price because the government wanted to pull the economy out of deflation. The background here was that the system back then was still partially tied to gold. And of course, many people feeling uncertain hoarded gold massively. As a result, the amount of money in circulation was reduced. This further intensified the crisis. But it's important to note that this was an absolutely exceptional situation at the time. That means the state actually wanted in return to stabilize the currency through all of this and to somehow bring the currency back to first place because they couldn't control gold. But they can control currency. But that was an absolutely exceptional situation during a deep systemic crisis, not a normal case if you look at the whole thing. If you look at it today, states would generally respond more through monetary policy, debt, meaning even more money in financial markets, because that's much more flexible. That means they can turn it in any direction. And that's why you shouldn't dramatize it, but also not ignore it, but rather see it in its historical context. You have to look at the whole thing. But in such an extreme case, of course, it would be an issue for investors. But we wouldn't be the gold suppliers if we didn't have a solution for this. That means even if something like this happened, you could simply talk to Christian about it. Assets, your gold reserves, silver reserves can simply be relocated to another country, to another high security vault, such as Zurich or Singapore or even Dubai. That means what is very important is that we deal with new developments on a daily basis. We are also in contact with many logistics companies and international mints. That means we're right at the source. And when new information comes in, we are usually the first to receive it. And then we also inform our clients about it in a timely manner, just as was the case in Germany in this situation. We are also happy to do so in these cases to discuss new solutions or new possibilities. That means at any time we are, of course, prepared for such situations. That means we also offer the right solution in those cases.
Yes, and I would say there are indicators for that. Well, I'm not a prophet, but when it comes to a gold ban, perhaps a value-added tax would be introduced first, or some kind of regulation. Maybe it would be abolished at some point. Those are the kinds of indicators, because the implementation of a gold ban is a bit questionable. Of course, anything is possible. But I think theoretically, anything really is possible. Then we would all live underground, because otherwise we'd be afraid that airplanes might crash into our houses. That's also possible, but it's rather unlikely. And regarding the gold ban, what does the state do with the gold if it's banned? I'm skeptical about whether that's not just a bit of fake news that gets spread around. But please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Nicola. We still have one final question. I'd like to ask you for a brief answer, Christian. How can I ensure that my family has access to the gold storage in case of emergency?
It's very simple. You can reach us from anywhere in the world, for example, through various means of telecommunication. You simply provide us with the names and birth dates of your family members, and that's all there is to it. And maybe one more tip, if you want it a bit more detailed, you could also have it noted down. All together, then the whole beloved family comes together. And it's not the fastest or the richest who gets access, but everyone has to get along nicely, because sometimes or often money and gold can lead to arguments. And if you specify all together, then the family must be present together. But name and date of birth, that's enough.
Thank you very much. Yes, with that, I will also conclude our big Q&A session. Many exciting questions. I hope they were also answered in detail, dear viewers. Now, I would also like to recommend our YouTube channel to you. Take a look and be sure to subscribe as well. There we also have many exciting videos on current topics, which we have, of course, covered today as well. but also, of course, on further developments in gold or precious metals, where, for example, we provide weekly explanations through our Gold Vorsorg. We bring you the latest news on precious metals, but of course, we also have our classic explainer videos. So subscribe to our channel. There you can listen to and watch many more pieces of information in addition to our monthly webinar, of course. But as I said, you are also welcome to send us an email at any time or reach us by phone. We look forward to every email and every call. Yes, with that, I would also like to once again sincerely thank our panel of experts, especially you, Christian, Nicola, and of course, our special guest, you could say, from Hungary, Melitta. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us again today. And perhaps I may also briefly mention that in May, the next webinar will take place again, and this time it will even be an anniversary webinar. We have now been running our webinar series here at Gold Vorsorg for 2 years already. Of course, next month, we have once again prepared many exciting topics for you. So sign up in advance now, come by. We are definitely looking forward to seeing you. We will also have a very exciting panel of experts again. As usual, you will again have the opportunity to ask your questions here. And of course, we will try to answer everything as well as possible. With that, I will conclude this exciting evening here at our Gold Vorsorg webinar. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you a pleasant evening and a good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Have a nice evening. Thanks.
Goodbye for now.
Bye.